Hey, welcome to Super Social Club. I'm Jeremy.
This is Whisky in the Six. I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whisky Rant Podcast.
It's a little crusty.
It's frustrating.
And it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Hello and welcome back to the Whisky Rant Podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Rob.
And tonight, talking about a couple different things. First, we just want to thank everyone for checking out our Ralphie podcast, and a special thanks again to Ralphie for joining us on that. It was a great podcast and a lot of good positive feedback for sure on that one.
Absolutely. A lot of people seem to really enjoy it. I think I have like almost 800 thumbs up already on that video, which is a lot for a short period of time for my channel. Anyway, so.
I think we have well over 15,000 listens or views on that. So by far our biggest podcast to date. And of course, a lot of Ralphie fans out there. And Ralphie did his thing, like just came on, and he's such a great storyteller. You can listen to that man talk whiskey all day long, and people definitely got their money's worth if they agree with me on that. What did you think? Did you want to ask him maybe a little bit more? I know I did. I know I had like millions of questions I wanted to ask him. But I mean,
I definitely did. You know what? I totally had more questions. I just knew that, I think I knew it was going to go down that way. And I kind of knew that I was going to get caught up in just listening to what he had to say, because there's a couple times where I was about to interrupt, but I'm like, man, it's fine. Just let him play it out. Cause everybody loved him. Everybody loves him. He's the OG, man. Like to interrupt him would be almost disrespectful.
Right.
You know, he's the guy. So
there was one thing where we were talking about scoring whiskey, and I asked him, why not score stuff, review whiskey that would score below 80%. And he kind of just said that he didn't want to like destroy a whiskey or, come down on if someone is drinking a whiskey that he might not think is as quality as some other stuff, he didn't want to necessarily make a point of saying that is not good. And I really should have just said, like, that's not really what I meant. I kind of meant more of like, you can give constructive criticism to a whiskey that you would score between 70 and 80, I think.
Yeah. And I think where he wouldn't score something under 80, I think I'm at like the same thing with maybe a 70 though. Like 70 is probably the lowest mark I would give regularly. Like there's a lot of stuff that I have that I haven't reviewed. 8, because it's hard to motivate yourself to review something crappy. I think for me personally, it's very difficult. There's things that sit here that are in the 80s for a very long time. You know what I mean? So I can imagine like if I had a 65 on my bar, like I'm never getting to that bottle. I'm never going to. So
I hear that. Yeah. Unless it's like something that's like super popular and that you want to make a point of saying that it's not good or something like that,
Yeah, I think I've only reserved, I think that Johnny Walker, White Walker is the only one that I didn't actually review on my channel. I think I just reserved the right not to score it because I couldn't give it a positive score. So I didn't think it was horrible either. I guess I think a lot of people reviewed it and trashed it on purpose because they wanted the views kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I totally get what he's saying though. Like he was worried about, I think you and I reviewing something and giving it a 72 and Ralphie reviewing something and giving it a 72 has a little bit of a different feel. Like Ralphie can literally like keep something on the shelf forever if he gives something a 72. You know what I mean? Like if he says, yeah, this is garbage, don't touch it, people are going to listen and people will not touch that whiskey. Whereas, if we say that, maybe it'll influence a handful of people to not do that, but nowhere near the impact that I think Ralphie would have.
Yeah, I think he's kind of set this precedent on his channel where it's like, if I'm reviewing something, I'm recommending it to be purchased because I'm at least giving it 80 or higher. So I think, yeah, you're right. I think at this time, if anything comes in below that, his viewers know that that's something that he would not recommend that you buy.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough. Well, let's talk about a whiskey that we would recommend people to buy. Our value whiskey tonight. We're going with the Glen Scotia, the Victoriana. This is something that you've had for a while. I just picked this up very, very recently. This is my first pour of it. Letting this thing sit. I cracked this about 4 hours before recording, threw a little coin on the top of it to just let it open up a bit. But so far, very, very impressed with what I'm getting out of this.
What's the ABV on yours?
So mine is 54.2.
Okay, so mine is as well. So it's the same addition.
Yeah, so there are some different batches of this with different ABVs.
So I sourced this from the SAQ in Quebec. Our buddy Casey went to the local liquor store, grabbed it for me, and sent it on its way. $100 Canadian. So I thought that was a good price.
Yeah, I paid just a little bit more for this out of Alberta. I missed the boat on those releases. But yeah, something that's coming in at cask strength. The quality that Glen Scotia puts out, I don't think I've had a bad bottle from them yet. Of course, this one coming in cask strength and finished in charred oak cask. Not sure if that's a virgin oak or an ex-bourbon oak. We kind of think most of this whiskey is ex-bourbon matured based on the profile and the color. Although it doesn't say natural color, so we're not 100% sure about that. It is non-chill filtered though.
It does say non-chill filtered, and it doesn't say natural color, which would lead me to suspect that it's not natural color. But I could be wrong, of course. It says finished in the finest deep charred oak casks. Mm-hmm. Could they be recharred ex-bourbon? I think the general consensus is that it's virgin oak, but it again doesn't say that on the box or bottle. So I guess we can assume that.
This is a smoked, cooked pear bomb, in my opinion. I get in so much of that cooked pear note on here. Of course, lots of vanilla. Really nice. Really like younger spirit kind of driven whiskey for sure.
Yeah, I think like they call this the Victoriana because I believe this is a process that they used 100 years ago or whatever it is. But I feel like this is a relatively new thing where people are starting to use virgin oak casks or heavily charred, recharred, whatever they are, casks for younger spirit. And it's really doing wonders for Scotch, I think. Like we saw that with a whole bunch of different things. Octomore does it often. I wouldn't be surprised if that Kilkerran 8 that's finished or that's aged in sherry might have some sort of, Glenallachie is doing a lot of virgin oak casks. So okay. I think that's how a lot of these guys are getting their color. And there's some sherry in there. So you think, wow, that's dark. That must be the sherry, but it's actually probably the virgin oak casks.
Yeah, this bottle was recommended to me by a couple of different people. So finally got one, picked it up. First impressions, very nice indeed. Really good stuff. So coming up on the show tonight, we're talking whiskey as an investment. Of course, whiskey in the last, 5 to 10 years has been an amazing investment for the most part. We're going to talk about some bottles that, of course, yield huge returns and some that might not. And you have a theory kind of on that, on a certain type of whiskey that might see a bubble burst in the upcoming future.
Yeah. So I've been talking to you about this, and you're probably annoyed with hearing how often I talk to you about this, but I've kind of run this by a few people, and it seems to like resonate with a lot of people. They're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. When we think back to our origin story of whiskey, all right, there's a lot of us that started by drinking the lighter stuff, like Canadian whiskey, like certain types of Canadian whiskey. A lot of us branched off from there into bourbon. And if you're American, you probably started with bourbon. Why? Because it's super approachable. It's sweet. It's got all kinds of good things going on. But what ends up happening usually when you spend 2, 3, sometimes takes a little bit longer, maybe 5 years with bourbon, is these guys start to get introduced to Scotch, and they're like, wow, it's now time that I can actually appreciate this. Whereas 5 years ago, I don't think I was ready. I wasn't ready for that peated whiskey. I wasn't ready for that Highland super sherried whiskey. I wasn't ready for the various types of Scotch that are out there. And I feel like the market is demonstrating the relatively new nature of like this whiskey boom. And it's coming from a lot of the guys that are just simply new to the game. So they're investing in what they like, which is bourbon, because they're relatively new to whiskey. They got into bourbon, they love it, and they want to support it. They want to hoard it. They want to do all these different things. And what's happened is it's caused a huge shortage. I honestly believe that this shortage is finite, because once these guys are in this system for 5, 6 years, all of a sudden they're going to start to venture into different avenues, and you'll always have a good percentage of that. Maybe I don't want to call it 50%, but there's going to be a good percentage of that will stay bourbon drinkers for the rest of their life. They're rah bourbon and whatever. But what happens when a good chunk of that goes away? I know you're going to still bring in new people, but there's a big portion of people that are buying bourbon right now that I don't think will be buying bourbon in 5 years, because when did this whiskey boom start? It started, what would you say, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Yeah, I think it probably started, 2000, and I think it's right to 2012 to 2015 is when it started getting a lot of legs, and by 2015 it was full on. It was full on. So it's been the last 6 years that it's been very, very heavy.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, like you're getting all these distilleries amping up production. You're seeing all these distilleries popping up in the last 5 years, and a lot of producers that have been sourcing stuff to get their feet wet are now going to be pumping out their own distillate, and that's just going to take them to a whole new level. We're going to see so much market saturation, I think, in the next 5 years from now.
Yeah.
It's going to be insane how much whiskey is going to be available out there.
Yeah, like right now we're seeing prices on stuff like Weller 12, Blanton's, just astronomical. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but
We will, yeah.
the floor is going to fall out from under these guys, I think. Like in 5 years, once these guys have all gotten to know whiskey well, and they're not just in it for the collection, they're tasting it, they're dabbling, they're understanding what it takes to make a good whiskey. Yes, those William LaRue Wellers, those George T. Staggs, those Pappies, they'll always be valuable. Those will always stay valuable. But that other crap is literally going to be like decoration on walls, because no one's going to give a shit about Blanton's Original. Nobody's going to give a shit about, even maybe Weller 12. Like it's 45%. It's decent stuff. It's an everyday sipper. And that's what it used to be, an everyday sipper, until it went nuts. And then people started hoarding it. And the only reason the price is going up so much is because 3 guys are coming in and clearing off a shelf. Right. So they're creating this demand. But once all these people recognize that that's just basic whiskey, that demand is going to go away. And those guys are going to be stuck with a lot of whiskey that's not necessarily valuable.
More people that try, a Van Winkle 12, the more people realize that, it's not a $600 bottle.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that too. I guess you're right. Like the Pappy Van Winkles, they're in short supply. The BTAC collection, even though there's still like some decent like volume putting out, there's only so much room in the Buffalo Trace warehouse to pick those barrels from. I think that's a lot of people don't understand that those selections, it's the same mash bill. It just depends on where they're putting it in their warehouse, and the master distillers and the tasters there are pulling the ones that match that profile, and there's not much of it. I mean, they have these certain racks that just work well in those warehouses, in those workhouses, and that's where they get that from. So expanding their line, like expanding Pappy, isn't really a thing you can really do, because it's very kind of centered in how they pull those casks. So yeah, those will always be valuable. But yeah, you're right. Like, you know, Blanton's, the cheap Weller stuff, the bottom has got to fall out on that sooner or later, because it's just that whiskey isn't the quality. And you're right, people are trying other stuff and they're getting frustrated with bourbon. And let's just throw up some of these prices that we're seeing now in the US. Now, we know that this is not what they go for, but this is what people in retail stores in the US are pricing these bottles at. And it's just, you're scratching your head. But there's some states where these things aren't necessarily available, and these shop owners are throwing crazy price tags on these bottles. Let's take a look at Blanton's. Here's one for $400 US. Now this broke the record of what I saw before. I originally thought 200 was crazy. Then I saw 300, and now someone's throwing a $400 price tag on this Blanton's original. Like, you got to be shitting me with this.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it blows my mind, because when bourbon was starting to become a little bit rare was when, like, really it was just the Kentucky distilleries that were pumping out the juice. But now, like, literally any states you can think of has distilleries popping up. Like, production is amping up across North America. We're not just talking the States anymore. Like, what happens when people start to recognize that there's Canadian distilleries that are new, that are pumping out awesome stuff? And I mean, Australian, Taiwanese, Indian, like all these different distilleries all over the world. What's going to happen to, like, is it really going to be that limited? Like, I can't keep up with the amount of whiskey that there is out there. So yeah, maybe a certain expression is limited, but when you know that, I can't get this particular bourbon, but there's 7 other bourbons, if not more, that are sitting on the shelf right now that are equally as good. I
mean, you don't even have to look outside the US. Look at the Texas whiskey scene right now. Look how good their spirits coming out at a very young age.
And it takes 2 years. It takes 2 years for a Texas whiskey to be good.
Yeah,
not even.
Those whiskeys are aging quick, and they're really good quality. The stuff they're doing in Texas right now, I mean, people are going to be looking elsewhere because they're going to be fed up with these prices. Let's look at Weller. Here's a store that's got Weller Special Reserve, $130, the 107, $300, the 12-year-old, $400, and the full proof, $350. Now, the full proof is less than the 12, which doesn't match secondary market prices. So you're getting a deal there, I guess. Yeah. But they are limiting you one per customer, Rob. So you can't go in and clear out the shelf at that price. You can only take one if you want.
Yeah, and the sad thing is they're getting away with it. That's the sad thing is there's people going in there and buying this stuff. So until that stops, we can't get rid of this problem. But I think it's going to solve itself. I really do. I think we just need to, like, after today, stop talking about it, because I honestly believe that this problem is going to solve itself. And I honestly feel bad for the people that could build a house with the amount of bourbon that they've bought in the last couple of years, because out of all the whiskeys out there to collect, I fear that that's one of, like, right now you can buy a Van Winkle 12 for $180 and flip it for, like you said, $600, $700, whatever it is. Yeah. That's Canadian dollars, of course, but that's kind of what's happening up here. What happens when people realize that that's not actually that limited? There's, let's say, 70,000 bottles of this made a year, whereas Springbank 21-year-old, there was 3,200 bottles made this year. Yeah, last year there was 36.
Yeah.
You know, those are limited. Those are extremely limited. To be able to get those bottles, you have to be one of 3,200 people out of millions of whiskey drinkers now, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, I think obviously if there's more retailers like this guy marking up all the stuff at those prices, you're going to see a huge decline in purchasing of bourbon, because the reason why people are stocking up on bourbon because it's retail wise relatively cheap, right?
Well, we're not done yet. We got more here. Have you tried Old Tub yet? It's Jim Beam product. They recently released it. It used to be, I think, a distillery only exclusive.
I can't keep up with all the old something or other. There's old Forester, old Granddad, old whatever. No, I haven't tried Old Tub.
Anyway, so Old Tub, it got a little bit of buzz in the bourbon community. I don't know why. I bought a bottle of it. I didn't think it was that good at all. In fact, I would take Old Granddad 100 proof over it any day of the week. But this shop has the nerve to throw $100 price tag on it. This is a $25 bourbon anywhere else you look. And the kicker, original Buffalo Trace, an original run-of-the-mill, this generic old Buffalo Trace, $210.99 US. What is going on with this? I think people are just going to get so fed up with these prices. I know that this is not what you normally see it for, but like honestly, like someone has the nerve to put a sticker price on that.
Let's paint the picture here for a second. You're that guy that walks into that store and buys that bottle for 210 American or whatever it is. You walk to the corner store up the street and see it for $40 US.
How about $20 US? I mean,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
This is a 10 times retail that you normally see it. I mean, I don't get it. I think it's turning a lot of people off. It's turning me off from bourbon for sure.
Wow. Yeah.
It's
I mean,
frustrating to see. I
like bourbon, and honestly, I like high quality bourbon. I was watching malt reviews recently, and they did their top 5, I think, bargain whiskeys of the year, or top 5 whiskeys of the year that were a bargain or whatever. And there was a few bourbons on their list, and honestly, it made me want to go like hunt them out and drink them. But where we are, first of all, it would cost too much money for me to get it because I'm paying secondary no matter what. I'm not finding that on the shelf.
No.
And it's just really, at the end of the day, is it worth it? Like, find me one excellent bourbon and I'll find you 7 at least different Scotch whiskeys that are just as good, if not better, for less on secondary. And unfortunately, we're paying secondary. So
yeah,
that's what we have to compare it to.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people are like, do I even open this bottle of bourbon I got? I mean, we had the LCBO allocation lottery. A lot of people won some Weller stuff. They won some Van Winkles, some BTAC. And like, is it worthwhile for you to open that bottle, especially if you've had it before and you know exactly what you're getting? Or is it worthwhile for you to sell it and buy whiskey that you know is better? Because you can get, 8 times, 9 times what you paid, and you can flip that and get some other whiskey that's you're not going to pay secondary on. That's going to be a lot better, in my opinion. So,
well, there's the pushers, right? There's those guys that are just literally doing this for the money, and what they're doing is they're buying bourbon and flipping it so that they can buy Scotch with that money. Like, and there's a lot of guys like this, and I've personally spoken to dozens of guys that are doing this. They're buying bourbon because they know right now they can sell that bourbon for 10 times the amount they paid for it, pretty much like the same day that they bought that bourbon retail, and then go buy their Springbank 21 for $400,
right?
Or 2 of them for the one bourbon that they bought.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, let's make this clear. We're not saying this does not happen in Scotch whiskey. Of course, it happens in Scotch whiskey as well. A great example, the Bowmore Aston Martin that we covered on this podcast 2 episodes ago. It was a Black Bowmore 1964 special edition Aston Martin. The LCBO got 1 bottle. They were charging $85,000 for it. a lot of people scoffed at that price. We were like, that's a great deal. And whoever buys that is instantly going to make a lot of money on it. One recently sold at auction came in at $118,750 US. So the person who got it from the LCBO, I'm not saying that this is that bottle, but almost double the money if that established the market price. I think that might be the first one that we've seen up at auction. So with the conversion rate, you're looking at about double the retail price from the LCBO. So there you go. A lot of people are scoffing at $85,000 price tag, but guess what? Whoever bought that just doubled their money instantly.
Yeah, and you knew it was going to happen. I mean, I live vicariously through this guy, Stefano Pileggi. He's an Italian guy in New York. And if you know who he is, or if you're on Instagram and you're following whiskey, you've probably come across his page at some point. This guy's got the best collection I've ever seen in whiskey. And he has one of these bottles. He has the old Bowmore Blacks and the newer ones as well.
Nice.
And he posted yesterday, I think it was, a price that I don't know if did we discover if it was like suggested price or retail price or
someone was asking price.
So it was $225,000 US. And he was just laughing his way to the bank because he paid, I think, $40,000 US for that bottle, because wherever he's buying his bottles, they know to ask him first because he'll buy anything that they get. So I mean, it is a very lucrative investment if you have the money to throw around. And we talked about the Macallan 72-year-old the last time we talked about the Aston Martin. Did we not?
Yep. Yeah. The Macallan Leak 72.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where, like, as much as it would break the bank to spend $75,000 on that bottle, that in a year that's going to double. Yeah. Because, I mean, the sad part is, like, nobody's actually going to ever drink any of that stuff. Like, that's the saddest part. But I mean,
yeah, it's just an art sculpture that goes on your shelf. Unless we mentioned before, maybe there'd be like a charity thing where they would crack one open and sell pours for a good cause or something like that. Yeah. That's probably the only way anyone's ever going to try it.
Yeah, I mean, it would take a lot. You would have to be very well off, I think, to be able to open that bottle justifiably and drink that with some friends. Yeah, $75,000. You would have to have the equivalent in money for us spending $75 or $100, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it takes money to make money, and the rich get richer because they have the ability to do stuff just like that. There are some bottles that are very popular as of recent that might not be the investment that a lot of people are thinking they might be, and that is the Macallan Edition series. Now, we've looked up kind of how many bottles of this are out there, and I know a lot of people are buying up all the Edition 6s because I think it's going to be collectible. But really, the market right now, I mean, of course, the Edition 1 is way up there in price, the Edition 2 as well. But it seems like people kind of caught on during Edition 3, 4, 5, 6, and now every single person that collects Scotch has that sitting in their bunker. And the numbers on these bottles, like, there's been a lot of Macallan editions released. I don't think people quite realize that. So we got the numbers here. The Edition 1, of course, it was the rarest, but there's still 90,000 bottles produced of that bottle.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. And you know what? Let's say 30% of that was opened. That means that there's probably still about 60,000 bottles circulating in the wild. You know what I mean? And when one guy sells one of those bottles for, let's say, $5,000, everybody's going to throw that bottle up on auction, and the market's going to just plummet downward because the first guy to the game makes the money, and then everybody else tries to meet that price, but then is settling for less. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, what I would like to compare it to is look at the Macallan 10-year-old cash strength. You can still buy those for about $2,000, right? Maybe less. So if you can buy that for less than $2,000, why the hell would you buy a Macallan Edition 1?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, I guess that those Macallan cash strengths came out multiple years, so I mean, there's probably more overall produced versus the edition 1 that was just that. But I mean, if you're talking quality, you're talking ABV, you're talking drinkability. I mean, we tried edition 1. It's a good whiskey. There's no doubt about it. It's good.
Yeah,
But
really good.
we've also tried cask strength Macallan, and it is phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, and we're talking old cask strength Macallan, right? Like we're talking when the 10-year-old came out, how many years ago was that? That was what, like 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, those were like I think, I don't know when they were discontinued. I want to say around 2010 to 2013, I think, is when those cask strengths were discontinued.
Yeah, and that's the no age statement version, right? So like the 10-year-old, it was probably in the early 90s when it was capped out. So we're talking 80s distillate Macallan cask strength at 10 years old minimum. Like,
yeah, and that's actually a great opportunity. Just give a quick shout out to Robin. He is a big fan of the show and the podcast. He recently poured us a couple samples of Macallan cask strength 10-year-old age dated. So I have those. I just got them. So Robin, thank you so much. Rob and I are looking forward to trying that on a future episode for sure.
Thanks, Robin.
It's gonna be awesome stuff. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
but the other numbers for these Macallan editions, of course, Macallan does their thing. You know, they threw out the edition 1, maybe as a little like tester in the market. Obviously, it sold out. Subsequent releases, you know, you're looking at about 250,000 bottles, give or take, for everything else coming out after that. The edition 6, couldn't find numbers on edition 6, but you have to assume at least 250,000 or more for that. So, you know, there's so many of these bottles available. I don't think that this, you know, edition series is something that's super collectible. Of course, 1 and 2 will command some money. You might get a little bit more on 3, 4, 5, but you're not really getting that much. Not enough to make it an investment, in my opinion.
Yeah. What does not surprise me about the list that you sent is edition 4 being 300,000 bottles.
Yeah.
That screams to me that it's the youngest by far. For them to be 70 to 80,000 bottles more than every other expression, every other edition, tells me that I was right in my assessment of that being the youngest. And I, to this day, I still think it's the hottest of the 6.
Yeah. For the record, we're sourcing these numbers from whiskybase.com. These are not official Macallan numbers, but Whiskey Base has been pretty accurate in their reporting before. So disclaimer, these are all numbers from whiskybase.com.
Yeah, if anything, I think the edition 1 is missing 10,000, and it was the 10,000 that were bottled for China exclusively in the wooden box.
Oh, right. Yes, there was an exclusive wooden box, Macallan. Yep.
So that's the edition 1. So let's say that there's 100,000 of the edition 1. That's the only correction, maybe.
Let's move into what's happening. WhiskeyTube, a really good channel, kind of brand new into the game. A channel called Mark Littlers. Mark Littlers. He does a really good focus on whiskey as an investment. He has a really good video on the Macallan Edition 6, whether he recommends it being a purchase for investment or not. So yeah, really interesting, really good take, great insight. Definitely a channel to check out. We'll link to it, of course, in the description down below. But yeah, of course, comes to the conclusion that no, Macallan Edition 6 is not an investment bottle. I mean, time will tell. We'll see what happens. There, you know, you look at the UK auctions, they are still getting a little bit above retail, but by the time you factor in auction fees and all like that, you're not really making any money at all on those bottles. So
Yeah, I think honestly, there's a certain formula. The problem is that the market nowadays has changed things. Like I think Aquavite is going to go into this on a live, and it'll probably happen after before we actually release this. But basically, the conversation is with the whiskey market growing, people are more people are coming to whiskey more than ever. And we're seeing it. We're seeing the challenge in getting a Springbank 12-year-old. That never used to be a problem. That never used to be an issue or a challenge.
Right.
We're seeing it. So there is a formula, and unfortunately, people are making their money right away. So you'll buy up, 2 Springbank 12-year-olds, and you could probably flip one for 20% on what you paid right away, just because of the way the market's trending. Will that continue? I don't know. It never used to be this way, but it's kind of like real estate. Real estate's kind of like that now. Like you only have to wait a couple months for real estate to go up in value.
Mm-hmm.
Will this stay a trend? I think it has to do with dollars in and out. Like people seem to be holding on to quite a bit of money, but will the pandemic change any of that? Right? Like, yeah.
That's a great point. Like, are we headed into a recession where spending is definitely curtailed, and it will definitely be affected in the whiskey market, as a lot of whiskey is a luxury product. So yeah, that's a great point.
Well, I mean, it's like anything else. Like the guys that tend to win are the guys that can weather the storm, right? So if you're looking at buying the Edition series and capitalizing next year, that's a little bit more risky. But if you're looking at buying all 6 of the editions and waiting 20 years and then flipping it in 20 years, yeah, you know what? There's a good chance that they're all going to be worth a good amount of money, because they're either all going to be drank up or like, who knows, right? So every whiskey is valuable in 20 years. Every single whiskey that comes out right now might have some value to it in 20 years, but some more than others. So there is a formula, I think, for investing.
Yeah, and check out Mark's channel. Really insightful and lots of intel. So yeah, definitely check that out. So let's get to the Glen Scotia. So what are your thoughts on this? What are you getting on this bad boy?
So there's a good, like, what I find with Glen Scotia when it's a little bit more peated than usual is it's almost like a motor oil kind of peat. Like a light. In this one, it's very light. It's not heavy. I don't find it heavy, like a heavy peat at all. But it's like, reminds me of that motor oil kind of note that I get from Glen Scotia. I had a really good single cask, a bottle pick from KWM a while back. It was a 19-year-old. It was a sherry cask. And there's certain elements to this that I found in that. Maybe it's the combination of the cask strength. They didn't actually know what was in that cask, that 19-year-old. So it could have been a little bit of virgin oak or heavily charred oak as well. Mm-hmm. It could be a combination of that heavily charred oak with their like peat, makes that like motor oil kind of note. I love it.
Yeah, I do get that. Almost like a little bit of like gasoline kind of vapor S to this. Like I said before, like smoked pear, definitely get a lot of that pear note on here. The vanillas are super creamy.
Yep.
Really, really nice.
Yep.
Of course, this for me is just a neck pour, but I can tell that this thing is a really nice whiskey. If you are into spirit forward, like distillate whiskey, I think this is just absolutely perfect.
Honestly, I'm loving my younger whiskeys these days. Like younger whiskeys, under 10 years old, cask strength. I want that bold flavor. Like I find that it was something that was underutilized for so long that's a new thing for us. Like it's new to taste a 5-year-old whiskey that's cask strength. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't assume that this is anything older than 7 years old, 8 years old.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but it's no
Yeah.
age, right?
I mean, I think I'm pretty comfortable to say that I would estimate this between 6 and 8. Although it doesn't, there's the heat. It doesn't really translate to like ethanol heat. It's more just intensity.
Yeah, I wonder if that has anything to do with the use of a heavily charred cask,
Yeah.
because it seems like whenever they use that seems like the solution. Throw your scotch, your single malt in a brand new oak heavily charred cask for 2-3 years for its initial maturation, and then stem off into like your sherry cask, your ex bourbon, your whatever, because it feels like that irons out the whiskey quite a bit.
Yeah.
And whenever you place it into something else, then you're just picking up like the nuances and stuff like
Right.
that.
Score wise for this, what are you giving it?
I'm gonna go like 86, 87 for this one. So somewhere.
Yeah. I think for me right now on a neck pour, I'm 86. Although I will eventually review this on my channel. I could see the score changing just because I know that this thing is going to open up probably quite a bit from where it is now. I can tell that it still seems a little tight. But when people have been telling me they love this whiskey a lot, so I'm excited. This is like my kind of style. I love this. To me, it feels like a majority ex-bourbon filled cask, and you can get some great stuff as long as you got good ex-bourbon casks. Really good whiskey comes out of it.
Yeah. If it stays at $100, it's a definite rebuy. 120, 150, I'm starting to like lose my interest, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for 100 Canadian, it's a where we would say that would be a nice buy. So 70-ish US dollars or so. And what's that, like 60 pounds or 55, 60 pounds, something like that?
Yep. Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think you see it on the shelf for that price. It's definitely worthwhile a pickup if you are into the whiskey, how we described it. That's gonna do it for us. The Ralphie stuff, like we said before, we got lots of content from that Ralphie thing, so we'll be probably dropping a little bit more of that in the Whisky Rant podcast in the upcoming episodes. So stay tuned for a little more Ralphie content. We recorded for almost 2.5 hours with Ralphie that day, so we still have a little bit left to show you guys. He's such a good storyteller. He has some interesting stories for sure, and make sure you check out his book. The new one's coming out soon, and his first book was really good as well.
Yeah, big thank you to Ralphie for doing that. That was awesome. And I think what a lot of people, if they didn't know then, what we should draw attention to is that that's only the second time he's ever appeared on anybody else's channel.
Yeah.
So he's only ever gone on a live with Aquavite Roy. That was just over a year and a bit ago. Mm-hmm. And then us, right? So it was a big deal for me, big deal for you. And I think for those who know, it was a big deal for them as well, because a really, really cool experience to have Ralphie on our channel.
Yeah, it's great to see him outside of his regular format, just kind of shooting the shit and talking whiskey stories. And it's great because, you kind of get the feeling like that's how you would talk to him if you were at a pub or, chilling with them on a day-to-day or whatever. So really cool to see that kind of view of Ralphie.
Yeah, I think that was the one biggest takeaway for me was whether we were talking to him before we press record or after we press record, after the whole thing was recorded, he was the same. He was the same from the moment he switched on his camera to say hi to us all the way to the end. He's just an easygoing, whatever, like ask me whatever, I'll say whatever I feel like, and that's it. And what you see is what you get. He's not pulling any punches, but he's also 100% genuine, and I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
Just that old school guy that just sits back and reminisces about the whiskey stories. I mean, you gotta love it, especially coming up in the whiskey game. You love that insight for sure. Absolutely. And respect it and cherish it for sure.
100%.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like we always say, we have this available on podcast. You can listen to it on all the major streaming services and on YouTube as well. Check us out, Whiskey in the Six, Sipper Social Club. We review whiskey. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, have a good one, guys. Cheers.